What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. My name is Miko, and this is your go-to place for all things Detroit Lions related. That includes news, updates, analysis, and so much more. And if you clicked on this video, you already know that the center of this conversation is going to be focused on both of the coordinators for the Detroit Lions, with that being Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, who are both up for various head coaching opportunities across the NFL. And so in this video, we want to basically talk about some of the interviews that they already have lined up for this week, as well as talk about which of these coordinators do I believe are most likely to actually take one of those opportunities. And the last thing that I want to discuss in this video as well is, if the Lions are to lose one or both of these coordinators, what are some viable options, and who do I at least think that the Lions could be looking at to be able to fill in as both the offensive and defensive coordinators for this team? But before we get into that conversation, if you are new to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel and you have never hit the subscribe button, please be sure to do that, as it helps out this channel immensely. You can also hit the notification bell, because that is going to make it so much easier for you to find out when we upload new content, as well as when we decide to go live throughout the week, as we do, I think, go live about 2 to 3 times every week. So if you're looking to stay up to date with some of the POD content outside of just videos, you definitely want to make sure that you hit that notification bell. With that stuff out of the way, let's get to what the center of this video is going to be, which is, again, the Lions potentially could be losing both coordinators, as both of them are up for a number of different head coaching jobs across the NFL. When we look at both Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, this is not very surprising, considering how well the Lions performed as a whole. Obviously, when you look at Ben Johnson in this offense, the Lions were one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL. They had the widest scoring margin. They were the best scoring offense in the NFL. And this has been a pattern that's been fairly, common for Ben Johnson the last few seasons, as he's been the one calling the shots for this offense. And so he's been a highly sought after commodity each of the last few off seasons. And so it's going to be really interesting to see is if this is the offseason when Ben Johnson finally decides to take one of those head coaching opportunities. The same thing can be said for Aaron Glenn. While his defense was not necessarily one of the highest ranking across the NFL, what he was able to do with so many different missing pieces across that defense, when you talk about losing Aiden Hutchinson, when you talk about losing Derek Barnes, Alex Anzalone for long stretches, when you lost Carlton Davis for a good amount of time, for this defense to still go out there and perform each and every week, it's a very high selling point for him as a coach. Not to mention just, again, the tenure of that Aaron Glenn has had in the NFL as a defensive coordinator, as a former standout corner in this league. There is a lot of respect that is given to Aaron Glenn. So it's not a surprise that both of these coordinators are being seen as top candidates for a number of teams across the NFL. When we start to look at, again, who is interested in both of these teams, both Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson have similar teams that are interested in both of these coordinators. Currently, Aaron Glenn has a few more teams that are reaching out to him to interview him, as he's already has interviews lined up with the Chicago Bears, the New York Jets, the New Orleans Saints, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So far, he's also been requested to interview with the Las Vegas Raiders and the New England Patriots. So of those teams, like, those are a nice little collection of teams that are showing a good amount of interest in AG. When you flip it over to Ben Johnson, you start to see a good amount of similarities, right? The Chicago Bears, the New England Patriots, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Las Vegas Raiders are all also reaching out to interview Ben Johnson this week. And he actually has interviews lined up with all 4 of those teams. The only team that is currently not expected to be interested in Ben Johnson, and it's really odd to me, is the New York Jets. And I don't know if that's because they are probably expecting a big overhaul on the offensive side of the football, and maybe they're looking for someone that's a little more defensive minded to be able to continue to keep that defense afloat. But whatever the case may be, I would honestly say that, like, the Jets would probably be one of the worst landing spots for Ben Johnson. When you go over to Aaron Glenn, I think Aaron Glenn has a good collection of teams that could actually be a really good fit for him. Again, not that I want him to go, but there are a number of these teams, when you talk about the Saints, the Jaguars, and the Jets, that actually have some pieces on that defense that, if you are injecting a coach of the caliber of Aaron Glenn, you're not completely leaving the cupboards bare. There's enough there for him to work with, and he can probably get that team to at least be competitive on one side of the ball while they're probably rebuilding the other side. Personally, in my own opinion, I think the New Orleans Saints would be the perfect landing spot for AG if he wanted to, again, take that opportunity to be a head coach. He's obviously coached there before. He obviously played there as well. And he has a good amount of relationship with that entire organization. And while the Saints do have like a number of cap issues that they would have to navigate, I think Aaron Glenn is the type of coach that you could bring into the building, that he would have a plan on how to get them from where they are to back to a place of relevancy. And you could be patient with that process with him at the helm. Again, not saying that I want him to go, but to me, like that just seems like the absolute perfect fit. Obviously, you also have the Jets, who he also played for, which again could possibly be another good fit for him. But I do think there's a lot more of a circus going on with the New York Jets, and it's a much bigger market. And I've seen AG in some of the media scrims here in Detroit. Not saying that he hates the media, because I don't think that's the case at all, but you can tell that like dealing with the media is not something he necessarily enjoys doing as part of his job. And so I don't necessarily think that going to the Jets, where it is a, mecca of media, would probably be the most, fitting thing for AG at this point. When you flip things over to Ben Johnson, obviously the team that gets brought up a lot, and I don't know if this is just the fans that are saying this, but there's a lot of people that look at the Chicago Bears as the next fit for Ben Johnson if he were to take a head coaching opportunity. Obviously they have Caleb Williams. They have that trio of wide receivers. When you look at DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Keenan Allen, they have DeAndre Swift. There's a lot of offensive firepower there. And honestly, like that offensive line is not nearly as bad when you start to talk about talent wise as you might think. Like they are definitely probably missing a couple pieces on the interior, but there is a lot there for Ben Johnson to kind of work with. I, on the other hand, look more so at the New England Patriots as possibly a better fit for him. And it's more so just from like in terms of like ownership and just how the organization is run. And I know I'm saying that after they just fired Gerard Mayo after his one season as the head coach, but I do think there's enough there in terms of structure. And again, if Ben Johnson has a good amount of say, that he could probably help get that team to a position of relevancy. You also, once again, do get to work with another young quarterback like Drake May and a number of like other young offensive pieces with New England. There probably is a little bit more of a rebuild there than there necessarily is in Chicago. But I think you would be able to be given, again, the same thing with Aaron Glenn, that level of leeway to be able to bide your time as you build this roster out. Now, with that said, like I said, while I can point out which of these teams I think would actually be a good fit for both of these coordinators, in my personal opinion, I only think that the Lions are really in danger of maybe losing one of these coordinators. And that coordinator to me is Aaron Glenn. And it goes for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, like I said, I think he has much better prospects out there in terms of what would be a good fit for him to be able to go into that building and have a good amount of, success based on how the current rosters are structured. Like I said, most of the teams that are interested in him actually have some really good pieces on defense. When you talk about the Raiders, the Jaguars, the Saints, and the Jets, those are really good defenses that, he wouldn't have to do a whole lot of like, overhauling with, but yet obviously he would have to do some things with the offense. But in addition to that, and this is really just kind of calling a spade, we all know that in the NFL, there are only so many head coaching opportunities. And so many of those head coaching opportunities rarely go to minority coaches. And someone like Aaron Glenn, who may really aspire to be a head coach, only has so many bites at the apple before, teams are just maybe no longer interested. And so I think when you look at this current crop of teams and you look at what Aaron Glenn has just able to do in this offseason or in this season with the Lions, this does kind of line up in a really good place to where if AG wants to take that step and be a head coach somewhere, I think the teams that are like, actually looking to hire him are a good fit. I think he's proven enough. And I think that, again, this is just one of those opportunities to where he could go into a really good situation, specifically talking about New Orleans, and really have an opportunity to grow and flourish as a head coach in that situation. Ben Johnson, on the other hand, while there are a number of teams that are interested in him, and a lot of people say like, hey, he could be a really good head coach somewhere, I consistently get the feeling that Ben Johnson isn't all that interested in being a head coach, honestly. Or at least not right now. I think he's having a lot of fun, and I think he's enjoying himself as an offensive coordinator. Of course, if you're him, you're going to take these interviews. You're going to see, what is out there and shake some hands and build those connections with people. But I feel like time and time again, we've kind of seen that, like, I just don't know if that's necessarily the step that Ben Johnson wants to take. Again, right now at this point in his career, he's only been an offensive coordinator for, I think, the last 3 seasons. So he's still relatively new to the position. And going and manning a team and being responsible for wins and losses at that degree is a big shift when you're talking about someone that's relatively new to being a coordinator and then going to make that shift to being a head coach. Again, I'm not saying Ben Johnson can do it. I'm not saying that he couldn't handle it, but I do question if that's truly a desire of his. I would not be surprised in the least if he was back with Detroit as the offensive coordinator and just waited another year or two before he decided to really start pursuing a head coaching opportunity. And kind of like the opposite of Aaron Glenn, while I do think choosing the Bears or the Patriots wouldn't be like the worst decision. Even the Jaguars could potentially be a good fit when you talk about personnel wise for Ben Johnson. I don't necessarily love the crop of teams that are actually available for him to choose from. Again, Chicago has some talent on the roster, but that ownership and GM situation is really, really ugly over there. The same could be said for Jacksonville, where they currently don't. They're currently asking their next head coach to be reporting to their owner. And I just feel like that's a recipe for disaster. And like I said with the Patriots, while I think they have a long history of sustained success, that firing of Gerard Mayo after one rookie season shouldn't breathe a lot of confidence in the next person that wants to take that job. So again, it would not surprise me in the least bit if Ben Johnson decided to just, go on these interviews, see what teams are talking about, see if there is a really good fit out there, and then just decided to come back to Detroit and coach as the offensive coordinator for a few more years. Now, building off of that, let's say with both of these coordinators, either one of them leaves or both of them leaves. Where do we think the Lions are going to go to find replacements for both of these guys? I think first and foremost with both candidates, or with both AG and Ben Johnson, it's going to start in-house. I think the Lions have done a really good job of continuing to stockpile talent at the coaching positions to where they don't necessarily immediately have to run out and try to find the next hot thing to basically call and run their offense or their defense. In the case of Aaron Glenn, we've even heard it come out of AG's mouth himself. He's been grooming Kelvin Shepherd, whether it's to be a defensive coordinator in Detroit or a defensive coordinator somewhere else. If Aaron Glenn were to step away, I would be willing to bet a good amount of money that Kelvin Shepherd would be the first option that the Lions would look to be the defensive coordinator for this team. He's obviously played here. He's been on the coaching staff ever since Dan's been here. He's been coaching the linebackers. He has the respect of the linebackers and this defense as a whole. And I do think he's at the point in his career where he could take over the reins for this defense and do a great job, because he understands what Dan is going to want to do, as well as be able to employ his own amount of wrinkles to it as well. Outside of that, things get a little tricky with the defensive coordinator position, right? Because again, and this is honestly with both coordinator positions, when you're talking about coordinators, very rarely are you, stealing a coordinator from another team. It's oftentimes you're looking at a position coach at another team that's, maybe young and up and coming, and hopefully trying to make that jump to coordinator or something of that nature. And so I don't have a ton of great names or great selections for defensive coordinator. One name that I would be interested in, and that's if he doesn't get a head coaching position and if he doesn't go back to his former team, and that's Robert Saleh as a defensive coordinator. I think obviously what he was able to do with the 49ers, even before he got to the Jets, was very impressive with what he was able to do with their defense. And I think if he's not a top candidate as a head coach for some of these teams, I think he would be a perfect candidate for Detroit as their defensive coordinator. Again, maybe someone that won't stick around a lot because, again, he probably still has that itch to be a head coach. But you get him in Detroit for a couple years, he builds up your defense, you have another great year or have an even better year defensively. And maybe in 2 years, you're back in this situation where you're looking for another defensive coordinator. Flipping it over to the offensive side, again, I think the Lions are going to look internally. You have Tanner Engstrand, who has been someone that a lot of fans have looked at and a lot of people have talked about is probably the heir apparent to Ben Johnson if Ben Johnson ever decides to take a head coaching job somewhere else. He is also someone who was once a tight ends coach, then moved to passing game coordinator here in Detroit. And so he's kind of taken a very similar path as Ben Johnson. And so a lot of people feel like, well, if the Lions were to lose him, that would be the next man up. Another name that I would like to throw out, again, looking internally, is Scotty Montgomery, the running backs coach and assistant head coach for the Detroit Lions at this moment. Obviously, Scotty would obviously have to let go of his running back coach title to be able to take on the responsibility of being offensive coordinator. But he's someone that does have that type of experience. And so those are the first two names that I kind of really think about when it's like, hey, if the Lions lose Ben Johnson, these are probably the guys we're probably looking at to possibly fill that role. Again, not really sure where they would go outside of looking internally, because again, I can't tell you the name of the hottest, wide receiver coach or running back coach or former offensive coordinator that would be a good fit. Again, we know that Dan does have great connections with a number of people across the league. He's done a good job of filling these position coaches in the past. When you look at him going out this past offseason and signing and going out and getting Terrell Williams from the Titans and bringing him in to be the defensive line coach here in Detroit. So there's always the possibility of that happening, of them going to another team and maybe poaching a coordinator or a position coach to be that for the Lions offense. But again, I think they love the continuity of what they have in the building. And I think if they believe someone like Tanner Engstrand or someone like Scotty Montgomery has enough knowledge and expertise to be able to call this offense based on the tools that they have available to them, like, I don't think there's a reason why they wouldn't hand over the reins to somebody inside the building. With that also said, I think because of how explosive this offense has been the last few seasons, this will be a hot spot for anybody that wants to be an offensive coordinator or just wants to be able to coach this, crop of talent. So I'm really not overly concerned in a situation where Ben Johnson were to go to move on, because I think this would just be a hot landing spot for any aspiring offensive coordinator. But that's pretty much going to do it for this video, guys. Let me know what you all think in the comment section below. Who do you think would be a good replacement if Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn were to leave? Also, do you think one or both of these coaches are likely to leave? And if so, where do you think they end up landing? Let us know that in the comment section below. And like I said, if you are looking for any more Lions content, or if you are looking to keep track of how this interview process is going on for both coaches, you can always go over to prideofdetroit.com. There is so much information over there, and we will be keeping you guys updated with all the latest news in regards to both of these coaches as they go through this process. So with all that said, I'm Miko. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.